often we tend to think of our courses as in isolation, right? And we forget that the skills that we're learning in one course apply across campus. One of our goals at a liberal arts university is to show you that interdisciplinarity, right? And especially in a first-year writing class, the skills and ideas that we're working with hopefully will be able to help you as you branch out across campus. So today we have a panelist, and I want to say just a very big thank you to our 4 faculty from across campus today. I'll let them introduce themselves, but they'll be talking with you about what writing looks like in their various disciplines so that you're able to see some of the differences, but also some of the similarities between writing across campus. And in order to give them their time, I'll go ahead and turn it over now to my first panelist. Thank you.
Hello. So my name is Dr. Cox. I am a psychologist, a clinical psychologist. I'm in the psychology department. And what I thought I would talk about today is a very particular genre, but it's of psychology writing, but it's one of the central and most important kinds of writing that gets done in psychology, and now that that's gone to a blue screen, so we can tap that. What we're going to be looking at is and talking about is an empirical article. Like this, and I thought I would talk a little bit about this particular article. It's one that I was an author on, and I think it illustrates a lot of the really wonderful things about writing in psychology, but a lot of the real difficulties and challenges. So empirical articles, when I say empirical, it means that they're based on data. That there's data that somebody's collected and you have done some kind of analysis of that data and you're going to frame the results in some way. That's the main goal of an article like this. It has a very standard form. So the genre is incredibly structured, incredibly the expectations for how it should look is very, very detailed. So that's not the place for creativity is in the form. For example, like titles have to be a certain way. They have to be a certain word number. Journals have expectations about the length. They have to your introduction has to be so many words. The standard form is always introduction, method, results, discussion. So that part is all set for you. And so the goal, the reason for that is for ease of communication, so people know what to expect when they're reading your pieces. This is a particular article I wrote a couple years ago. If you were a psychology major, you might write something of this form. An empirical article. If you were in research methods or in our Psych 412 class, our capstone class, students go and do research and then write up a report on that empirical research. It's also the case that if you were a psychology major, you'd read lots of articles like this, so you get to see what it looks like. So one of the real challenges I find in this kind of writing is that well, it's supposed to be scientific. So this is one thing that psychology is like always like aspiring to be scientific, and you're about to hear from a chemist. And so the social sciences oftentimes kind of feels like, oh, we like really want to be like a real science. And when you're a real science, you are trying to be dispassionate, you're trying to be objective, you're trying to be very precise. And it just turns out that many of the topics in psychology are not dispassionate, that they're not objective, that they're not precise. And so that's one of the real challenges, is figuring out how to take your phenomenon that's in one form and communicate it in this one method. So this particular piece is on suicidal ideation among combat veterans who have post-traumatic stress disorder. And they go through a treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder, and what we're tracking is the suicidal ideation, so their thoughts about harming or killing themselves. And so you can imagine, so there was like data that was collected, and it took hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours to collect this data. You can imagine there's this huge data set, I analyzed it in a particular program called SPSS. It's a software application that does statistical analyses, and the file itself was just huge, and it would like take me forever to just scroll through it, and you can imagine just like all these numbers and numbers and numbers and numbers. But the thing to realize, so psychology, we like to do things quantitatively, we like to do things with numbers, but behind those numbers, there's all these stories. And so that's the case like with all kinds of data in psychology, but especially in this kind of context where the stories behind these numbers are these veterans some of those stories are the stories of what's happening in their life right now. Some of those stories are what happened 5 years ago, 10 years ago when they were in Iraq or Afghanistan or when they were in Vietnam and they had a combat experience where a buddy died or maybe they saw some horrible things. And those horrible things those burdens are with them now. And that's what that data represents. That's what that data is. And so on the one hand, it's really easy to just look at that data and be like, oh, it's just a set of numbers. On the other hand, if you kind of just like think about like, well, wait, what generated those numbers? There's this amazing well of human experience and drama and tragedy and trauma that data is telling us about. And that's what this paper is trying ultimately to convey, is something about that. But it's trying to do it in that precise, routinized, specific, quantitative way. And that's the challenge, is how do you tell something that's true about the human psyche in this very clear scientific method? And that would be the challenge, like if you were to be a psychology major, for you, whatever data project you worked on to figure out how to do that. I can tell you this manuscript probably went through, so I'm the first author, which like, oh, sounds great, but what that means is like you're responsible for it, and so you pretty much write it, and then you rewrite it, and then you rewrite it, and you rewrite it. I think I wrote this manuscript, I probably had like somewhere between 30 to 35 drafts of it. Because we went to the first journal we went to, they were like, oh, let's go to like super prestigious journal that everybody knows about, and they were like, no, we don't want this. Take it away. So we have to like rewrite it for the next journal, and so forth. And I can remember the first time I sent out a draft to my mentor, which is the last guy, Peter Turk. I remember there was like I had like in the first paragraph, I had like the phrase still, comma, or even so, or something like that. And he was like, whoa, buddy, calm it down here with all this like inflammatory language. And I was like, what do you mean? I just said like still. And he was like, yeah, we got to be precise. We got to be objective here. And so even like, that's like a process I'm always working on, is like figuring out how to take the drama, the tragedy, the redemption that's in data like this and convey it in a scientifically precise way. And it's a really hard process. But at the end of the day, you have something really good. Which this is actually a really good story, is that we can actually reduce suicidal ideation among veterans with PTSD if we get the good treatment. It's not like the theory of relativity, not this amazing idea, but it's a really good thing to just nail down. So that's what I think of as the challenges, the excitement, and the possibility of doing writing in the field of psychology, and something that you might get a taste of if you were to be a psychology major. Let me say one other thing. I'm gonna have to leave early because I've got students I gotta help on for a test that they're taking this afternoon. So I'm sorry. I'd like to say for the entire time, but.
Hello, everyone. My name is Oksana Love, and I'm in the chemistry department. So chemistry, I think a lot of people that think of chemistry, they always think about some scientists, right? Mad scientists wearing goggles in the lab, mixing things, right? Running the instruments. So what the writing has to do with that, right? Well, really, writing is incredibly important. I cannot even explain how important it is, because once again, if you are a scientist, right, and let's say you have some groundbreaking result, you need to communicate it with your science friends, right, science community, but also as a community as a whole. So that's where the skill of writing well comes into play. Let's say, again, you're an important scientist out there and you need to continue your research, right? Which means you need to get your grants from somewhere. You need to get that money from somewhere. How are you going to get that? Again, by writing proposals. So the writing is incredibly important. I cannot stress enough. And again, a good writing is a good skill because, again, if you want to write papers, get grants, anything along those lines, it's a very competitive world, so your writing has to be on point. I think a lot of times people think of scientific writing as a dry writing, you would call, right? But I'm okay with that personally because I always joke with my students like it should be shorter but straight to the point, sweet and short, right? Just say what the facts are and we don't need any more flowers, right? So again, some people like it, some people don't. But again, the idea is that everything that you say has to have some sort of a proof, some sort of a data, right? Results to back up your words, basically. So I think it's important to point out that there are three major writing skills that one needs to have. Those documents are very similar, but they have a different sections. So first is a so-called scientific review, right? So scientific review is a summary, right, of the literature that is out there. Chemistry students actually that are taking maybe 400 level classes at UNCA actually are introduced to that. So for example, in my nanochemistry class, I ask students to write a review paper. What does it mean? It's basically a summary, right, of the literature that is out there. Which sounds like, oh, it's easy. I'm just going to go find those papers, right, and going to put stuff together. Well, it's not, because it requires lots of skills, right? It requires you to know how to read the paper, how to gather information that you actually need, how to pinpoint that information, right? And then actually put it all together in a particular way. Another writing, I think, document that's incredibly important is a proposal and how to write one. And again, chemistry majors at UNCA are introduced to that as well in higher level chemistry classes. And that's also incredibly complicated because you really have to go out there. You need to know your literature. You really need to come up with something new and propose it in a certain way that, you know, someone is intrigued by that and wants to give you money, right? So you can do your research. And most important, I think, it's to write the actual papers, right? To write a scientific paper is the most common way how scientists communicate, period. And that was the perfect example for that, right? So for better or for worse, as a scientist, you're kind of, in a way, defined, right, by a published paper, by the number of published papers that are out there. And again, it's a competitive market, right? So, right, if you want to put it in a really good journal or not good, of course, the data is important, but it's also important how you're going to write about it, how you're going to present it. So, again, for the chemistry majors here on campus, I think writing papers is the skill 101 that we're trying to teach since they start. So for those that are potentially interested in chemistry major, hopefully you would know you by now, but I have two kind of sample 4-year programs that we have here at UNCA. And the idea is that we ask chemistry major to have foundation classes first, and that would last about 2 years. And after that, you would take more advanced classes. And again, that would be kind of tailored towards your interest. So during the first 2 years, students, again, learn those foundations, but they also take the required classes that are not just required for chemistry majors, but also for physics major, environmental studies, biology, right, and engineering. So for example, the first lab that students take, which we have from 150 to 250 students a semester. So if you think about it, there's a huge percentage of the whole body that have to take that lab. We already kind of ask students to start writing a little bit. So we teach students how to start writing the introduction towards the paper, towards how to write the abstract, right? How to write the results, conclusions. We introduce students towards how you actually write, because once again, every journal is different, right? And there's different way to write. And then by the end of that first semester, students actually write the whole report, which has all those parts that scientific paper would have. That continues towards the next semester, and that's when actually they put in manuscript together as a group in a template from the analytical journal that is actually out there. So we truly put them in the position of, you're a scientist, think like a scientist, write like a scientist. From there, we go into organic lab, and again, kind of same thing. You have to write your reports, and then from there, that's where you take more advanced classes, and that's when you start doing proposal writing, right? Again, summary of the research out there, things like that. Yes, so, and I think one thing that I wanted to point out that it might sound hard, but there is some help out there, right? Because the faculty always will be there to help you. There's always instructions on how to write. And also, I think for those who are taking the Chemistry 101, I mean, in the Writing Center, we have all the rubrics there for the students to come in and actually ask for help, to ask how to write. Because once again, scientific writing is a little bit different, right? That your maybe typical writing in a Lang 120 is. But yeah, that's all I have. Thank you.
Hi. So I am Dr. Hansen in the English department. And if I'm squinting every once in a while, it's because this light's really bright, so I'm not giving you guys faces. I'm just trying to see you. Because I want to ask you all a question. How many of you are creative writers in this room who want to be creative writers or kind of write on their own, but maybe don't want to say that they're creative writers? Okay. So a few more. It's okay. I didn't call myself a writer for a really long time, even though I was writing for a really long time. I'll just talk a little bit about my creative process and maybe kind of maybe you'll recognize some of this. And so, so especially for those of you that are interested in creative writing, and even if you didn't raise your hand, how many of you, have written maybe a poem or an essay or a story, and you write it down and you look at it and you're really proud of it. You're really proud of yourself, and then you set it aside maybe for a day or two. And you come back and you look at it and you go, oh no, what have I done? This is not the thing that I thought it was. Anybody have that experience? I have that experience. Let me just tell you, it never goes away. But if you look at that, let's just say it's a poem. You look at that poem and you have, let's say, 14 lines, and there's only one good line in it. And you can either say, oh, give up, I'm done, or you take that line, you push the other stuff aside, maybe you save it for another time, you take that one line that you're really proud of, and then you spend time on it, and you work around it in this poem, and you keep at it for, it depends on your process, could be a couple of days. That's a sign that you're probably a writer. And either it's a good thing or it could be, I don't think it's a bad thing, but I do think it's a hard thing. Writing is really, really hard, and creative writing is its own beast as well. So I do think that some of the similarities that we're probably going to pick up on here today is, you have a process, and one way to get started is to have a question, right? So when I want to write something, I come back and ask myself, okay, so maybe I had to toss all this stuff away, but I had the one line that was still good, and I have to ask myself, okay, so what was it that I motivated me to write about, start writing this poem or this essay? And I don't necessarily always have an answer, but I have to open myself up to exploring, right? It's all about trying to not limit yourself to where the writing takes you, because it could be you'll go somewhere else. But having a question is a good place to start. And even more than that, I think is just what is motivating me to write. One of the things that I did, just to kind of give you a little bit of context, with my first manuscript project, it was a memoir. And it's kind of interesting listening to Dr. Cox talk about his project, because this whole memoir is definitely dealing with the childhood trauma and sort of struggling with PTSD, and then coming out of it. I was a teen runaway, grew up in a very unusual circumstances, and I did not want to write that story for a very long time. But I saw it. It was coming in those, the one line in the poem, and everything else sucked, or like. I started trying to put it into fiction because I wanted to have that sort of protection of either the fiction, so nobody could ask me like really personal questions. By the way, they always do anyway, so just get used to that. Same thing with the poem, they're still gonna ask you. But I finally, after years of working on this, realized, okay, this is a memoir, this is the thing I'm gonna do. Now, how do I do it? I studied a lot of memoir, actually after I wrote the manuscript, or the first draft of the manuscript, I should say, because while I understood what I was trying to do, I couldn't really articulate it when anyone asked me. And when you're in the academy, people ask you that stuff all the time, and so you need to get comfortable talking about your writing. And so for me on the page, I was trying to create like the experience. What did it feel like to, be walking in the grocery store and seeing Velveeta cheese and having a freak out, because like that's something that, happened around some weird meal at my house when I was 7. It's like things like that. And so how do you function and how do you get better? I mean, I think the terms you guys would call that in psychology is like acting out and working through. Does that sound familiar? Sure. Okay. Well, that's how I started to be able to articulate it. I actually went back and I read some lit theory that dealt with trauma theory, trauma in literature, so I could articulate, okay, this is what I was doing. And it was something that I really had to defend when I talked with editors who were trying to get me to give more of an easier way of unpacking the story, easier way for the readers to get it. And I'm like, well, it's not supposed to be easy. It requires the reader to really get in there. And I think, and to let themselves open up to that experience. And that was something that I really felt committed to. And so I think as young writers, when you feel like you finally understand your motivation, and you might have multiple motivations to getting a specific kind of story out, or memoir, nonfiction, or a poem, is you really have to know and believe in your motivation. Even if that motivation, grows and have, other things come out of it, that's the thing that you want to hold on to. And then, because you're going to need that, because when you go back to revise and you go back and you live with the project forever and ever and ever, or even if it's in your creative writing classes, you're writing one essay, you're going to get sick of it. You're going to be like, why did I decide to do this? This is so tiresome and tedious. And you have to remind yourself, oh, I had a reason for doing this, and it's important to tell this story and to do it justice. And so if you can have that motivation with you in the process of revising, and then also reading a bunch along the way, because you have to read to be good writers, and you have to read good stuff. You can't read not just anything. You have to read like good literature. That motivation will save you. So that's just like a tiny bit of advice. I mean, I could talk about this forever, but if I had to convey like one really important thing for you guys as creative writers or thinking about creative writers, that's one of the things that I would say. And I would also say that it can, doesn't have to be, just within creative writing. I think that's something that goes across all the disciplines, for sure. But it definitely is something that you will need as creative writers. So that's pretty much, I don't want to take too much time. I don't know how long I've been going on, but that's pretty much all I have to say about getting started. I think the starting place is the hardest part, and then having the energy to stick with it through years of revision, or even just a couple of weeks when you're in a semester. But save all your stuff. That's my other big advice. Save everything. You have to have folders, even if you're not going to look at it for a while. Save all the things, because later on, when you want to start a new project, you're going to go back and you're going to look at some of those other lines that were okay, worth saving, weren't great, and be like, but I had a good idea there. So I can go back to that idea and have my new project and a new thing to go with. So, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Thais Ruffin. I'm in Africana Studies. This is a new appointment for me. I recently returned from a Fulbright scholarship in Ghana, West Africa, where I taught at a university there. And I'm excited about my new appointment in Africana Studies, where I get to look at race, schooling, and equity issues in public schools. But my background for the past 15 years has been in education. I'm a former high school special education teacher. And at UNC Asheville for 9 years, I've been working with our teacher licensure students. So I'm going to speak to that today because I'm still in the Department of Education, but primarily now in Africana Studies. All of you could add teacher licensure to your major. So whether you're English, whether you're chemistry, whether you're psychology, think about being an elementary teacher, a middle school teacher, or high school teacher. It was a fascinating experience for me to be a high school special education teacher, and then, as I said, for 15 years of being a teacher educator. So please tell me first, what do you remember getting home from teachers in terms of writing? I like interactive dialogue. You can probably tell. What did you get home? What came home from teachers that you saw where they actually had to produce something in written format and you had to take that in? You can think of K-12 if you don't want to talk about your experience now. What happened K-12? Yes, You got nothing home? Not one thing. Teachers never communicated. Not one note. Oh, you were homeschooled, you did online. One brave person willing to take a risk. Yes. Progress reports. Yes, come on. Yes, because you took a risk. Kent, I don't know what you're gonna do with the mic, but I think you know me now in 9 years. Yeah, if you have to lower it. Progress reports came home from teachers. I mean, when teachers gave you assignments, did you not get rubrics? Did you not get checklists? Did you not get an assignment description of what you're supposed to do for an assignment? Did they not prepare wonderful, beautiful Google Slides, PowerPoint presentations with written text? Oh, did they not send things home like newsletters? This is from my son's middle school, parent-to-parent seminars. Come on out to a newsletter, come out to an event, look at this newsletter. Oh, this is what's happening in English language arts. This is what's happening in math. Oh, social studies, science with such and such. Newsletters, okay, progress reports, report cards. What else in terms of parent, school communication that you might have received? Someone else want to step out there? Yes, thank you.
Just like comments about participation.
Yes, how are you doing? Are you participating? Are you engaged? Are you active versus being passive? Thank you. Yes. One more. Yes, sometimes we have kids in schools that have different plans. As a special ed teacher, I had to write something called an individualized education program. It had goals, it had objectives, it had resources, benchmarks, accommodations like extended time, alternate rooms for test taking. Sometimes that was 20 pages. We have kids that sometimes have 504 plans, accommodations. We have kids who are gifted in public schools and they have something called differentiated education plans. They're written by someone. Then we have kids who are English language learners. They have things called limited English proficient plans, written by education personnel. But think about this as our final example of things you might remember. Think about your favorite teacher and what they did in class. In the education department, our students are required to write lesson plans. I know you thought that teacher was extraordinary. They like came in, boom, bomb. You were so excited. They really grabbed your attention. You were hooked into that lesson. You're like, that teacher rocks, awesome. It didn't just happen like, It took something called a lesson plan. Our students in the education department, they can write 4 to 5+ pages of actually thinking about how they're going to facilitate a class. How are they going to engage students? How are they going to meet the needs of different students? How are they going to be inclusive? So that it's not just auditory, so that it's not just visual, but it's multimodal, with multisensory, with different modalities. So lesson planning is a huge part of what our students do. I know in your Lang 120 class, you've learned about expository writing, persuasive writing, descriptive writing, and narrative writing. In education, we do a lot of expository writing. We also do persuasive writing and descriptive writing. So when I think about our students doing things like lesson planning, they also do journal writing, which is descriptive. We may say, read something. Now, take the time to actually think about your reaction to what you read. Because if you read something from here that says the history of institutional racism in U.S. public schools, and then you have to create a 6-page double entry journal where you find quotes from the text, and then you respond and write your reaction to the text, and then you think about your implication for practice. So beyond lesson planning, we also do journaling with descriptive writing. Sometimes we have reviews. This is one of the latest books from an eminent scholar in culturally responsive teaching. Dr. Love is in Georgia, and she wrote this book, We Want to Do More Than Survive, Abolitionist Teaching and the Pursuit of Educational Freedom, where our students might have to write a review of the chapter or a review of the book. And what are reviews? Reviews, you're mostly looking at persuasive writing. So can you do that? Our teachers do that. Our teacher licensure students to say, okay, now let me write a persuasive piece reviewing this book or this book chapter as I think about how this is going to impact me and my role and responsibilities as a teacher educator. We also have students do annotated bibliographies. Do you like those? Where it's like, if you're going to have a classroom of 30 students with various needs and you're going to teach that chemistry lesson to kids who are English language learners, to kids with disabilities or differences in ability, to the gifted child, and to the kid without a plan, okay, I want you to sample multiple sources, then I want you to give me a descriptive paragraph, and then I want you to give me an evaluative paragraph, and then talk about implications. How can you use that in the classroom? Because all of our education licensure course has field experiences. So we just don't talk and say, do the lesson planning and write the reviews, but you're gonna be out there in classrooms, in the real world with kids, trying to do something positive and make a positive impact. I said lesson plans, journaling, reviews, annotated bibliographies, and of course, presentations. Our students now are really big into digital literacy, so students are creating Google Slides with Pear Deck. How many of you have heard of Pear Deck? And Pear Deck is an interactive presentation. So you can like put questions in that Google Slide, PowerPoint type of thing, and then you pose the question, you can share it with your whole class, and everybody will have it pop up on their screen. It's like having Kahoot and Poll Everywhere right in your PowerPoint presentation. It's an add-on to Google Slide called Pear Deck. Our students love it because they're like, when I'm teaching something and I got my Google slideshow going, and then all of a sudden I have an add-on like Pear Deck, and I make it interactive and participatory, and all the students have their devices out, because you know most schools are one-to-one today, and they love having the technology to engage. They're like, oh, Dr. Ruffin, that was the best lesson, awesome. But that still was written. To create a Google slide, to use Pear Deck, and you're using a type of writing in order to facilitate learning in the classroom. So as you think about the different 4 types of writing, from expository, persuasive, descriptive, narrative, as you can tell, and hopefully please note that I said in education we use typically the 3 types of expository, persuasive, and descriptive. For me, I have written a book on Somalis with disability based on my dissertation that I did in Columbus, Ohio. I've also written more than 5 book chapters on issues in education. I have more than 4 journal articles in peer-reviewed journals on certain things. And I also, because I'm an activist, as also I believe in advocacy, I've written a series of op-eds that really focuses on persuasive writing, and I encourage our students to do the same thing. I said, do not see your role as a teacher licensure student only in the way that you are doing lesson planning, journaling, journal article reviews, book reviews, and annotated bibs, but do see yourself as a change agent. Do see yourself as involved in our society, as a person who can make a difference by using persuasive writing as a way to impact public intellectual space. So for me, I've written op-eds like why parents should advocate to close the achievement gap. Another op-ed I wrote was called Be a Community Collaborator. And then I've also written one called Let's Thwart Structural Racism in Our Public Schools. So I encourage our students in teacher licensure to do that too. The education profession is under attack right now. Have a voice. Speak up. Don't be afraid to put an op-ed out there, a piece of persuasive writing telling people things that are important and that they should be mindful of. And I believe in our education department, that has been part of the crux of our work, is that we want to prepare people that are change agents, activists, advocates, but as well as effective teachers for all learners. So thank you, Ms. Pisano, again, and your team for an opportunity to share once again about writing from education. I will still teach a course in education for those of you that may pursue teacher licensure, but if you want to take courses with me in Africana Studies or the Africana Studies program around race and public schooling, please do so. We do have disenfranchisement and marginalization occurring right here in our public schools that are excluding people. And so if you want to be on the cusp of really being a change agent and making a difference, where we're not treating people like second-class citizens, come see me in Africana Studies and Education. Thank you.
Thank you again to our panelists. And now we're opening it up to questions. What questions do you have for our panelists about writing in their disciplines, about writing in general at the university? And I'll just let you guys take questions.
Don't be shy. We're really mean, can't you tell?
I was just wondering, for all of you guys, was there like one piece of literature that like really changed how you viewed writing in your field?
That's a tough question. I have to think about that one for a second. It depends. I go back to this novel it's a modernist novel, and I have to say the structure of the writing and the lines really interested me. She was not the greatest person, but the novel is Nightwood, and it's by Juna Barnes, and then it's a lesbian novel, and it's one of the earlier ones. I don't think it is actually the first. But I was really struck with what she was able to do at that time in American literature. And so it motivated me to, one, be able to read difficult texts, to be able to be critical of the things that were not exactly stellar about that text, and also it helped me to challenge like my own lines, my diction choices and the way that the material would come together. So she was a big inspiration for me on those levels. Good question.
I took up so much time, but I had to look up to see the year in the 1990s, Dreamkeepers, Successful Teachers of African American Students by Gloria Ladson Billings. Profound, because for the first time as a first-generation college student and an African-American woman from Washington, D.C., to show up in college in my second year of college and saw this book by an African-American teacher educator. It was like I saw me in that, and I was like, what? It's a Black woman, PhD, writing about being an effective teacher? And that was the hook.
You ask in our careers, so I think I will not remember the year of that article or the name of that scientific article, but it was during my undergraduate career for sure. I think it was a turning point for me when I didn't know if I want to be pursuing PhD in chemistry or do I want to go, let's say, in the medical field. So I was kind of torn in that, and I think for me the truly turning point was starting doing the research and actually going into the lab and actually doing the work. and then again producing the paper. And while producing the paper, I started reading literature, and it was such a cool experience that I really enjoyed it. And I did research in undergrad for about 3 years, but that was I think the research was the starting point for me to start reading the papers and get inspired.
Another question.
What writing skills do you feel are most important to learn to be able to write in all of these systems?
I can start. Again, specific writing skills, I think, again, when we talk in the chemistry field, they're truly specific. We definitely use a specific voice in sentences. Let's say the most common thing that chemists like to do is not to use the word I or we, or everything is a past passive voice. It wasn't done by magic, right? It was determined, it was measured, things like that, which I think it's always hard for the students truly to switch, especially when you're writing a piece that it's your personal in other fields. So I think those are the most complicated things that usually students kind of have when they start writing in a science. And another thing that I think the most complicated is to truly describe the results. So a lot of times students have the results and they could be awesome results, but again, you need to make sure that you describe them, that you clearly indicate to your reader what are those results and why they are important. But those are the most kind of challenging things, I think.
For me, I have being concise and succinct. Sometimes to be too verbose is just not worth it. People get lost in your true message. To be a recursive writer, continue to go back and cycle through. Avoid jargon has been something that's been important in education, especially when we do things like op-eds. People don't know all the education and technical terms. And then vocabulary. Don't be afraid to vary the vocabulary. One thing I remember as a doctoral student, my advisor said, Thais, you have used lack of too many times. Elevate and start saying dearth or paucity. And I was like, oh yeah, that the sword should be my friend. And I was like, but why not? So I think that's important because I think that becomes the mark of, in my opinion, some great writing when I do see things that has a variety of vocabulary.
Yeah, I think all of these things are, across writing, really important. And I think it kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier. In creative writing, anyways, you have to be willing to. One of the phrases we use, kill your darlings, the thing you love so much. But, such a nice, I created such a beautiful image. And it probably is, has some aspect of it that is beautiful, but you have to be able to recognize when it's not, and you have to be able to let it go. And then revision, of course, it comes in revision and revision. I think I said that like a lot last time. Let me say it again. You have to be ready and willing to revise. So, yeah.
So I wanted to ask Dr. Ruffins, I wanted to ask you about how your experience of being a U.S. Fulbright scholar, how did that impact your writing and your teaching as well?
Ooh, excellent question. I published my first Fulbright product in September. I had to make sure that I possessed intercultural competence and I had sensitivity in my writing. Because one could say going to Ghana, West Africa, and it is a developing country, so definitely things are not the same in education there as it is here. And so in my writing of that article, I had to be very careful not to operate from the deficit perspective, nor from the missionary savior perspective. That's not my MO anyway. But that brought a different level of consciousness to my writing so that I would not disenfranchise Ghanaians who would then read it and say, oh, same old, the typical American who goes to a developing country and think they're the best thing since a slice of bread, and that they gave all of this, but they didn't benefit. So I had to make sure in my writing that reciprocity was there. I mutually gained and benefit. It was definitely a two-way exchange, and to have that, that sensitivity, knowing that my students that were there for a year would read my work and my colleagues, and that I didn't want to come off. Again, I think in so many ways, sometimes when people write about other people, that I'm not Ghanaian. I'm an African American with roots in the South. I do not know my ancestral home. So I just had to make sure I wasn't othering them in my work, because I definitely wouldn't want anybody to do that. Thank you so much for that question.
Okay, so, and I think every one of us can relate to this issue. So in our Lang 120 classes, we are discussing how budget cuts in the humanities discipline are impacting due to STEM, new improvements in STEM. So from a literary, philosophical perspective, how do we persuade lawmakers to not enact these policies?
Yeah, I'll try on a literary perspective. I don't know if it's just a literary perspective, but I think what's really, really important, in part of taking action, right? So this is interesting because this came up in my Lang 120 class the other day. Stories are really important. You have all the data in the world, and if you don't attach that to a story, then it won't have the same impact. So I think part of taking action, and maybe, going to policymakers, lawmakers, offices, you have to make it personal and you have to tell the story. And it helps to know how to tell the story, right? Because you can look at it, you look at data and it should affect, right? It should be like, so your question is specifically towards education, right? So stop cutting education. So you can say, well, look what's happening to students in the classroom. You can talk about all that stuff in terms of numbers. You bring the students in and you have make the lawmakers look at the students, and you have to say, this is how I feel like you're failing me. I don't know if that's exactly the terminology. I mean, you could say that, but you could frame it in maybe another way, like a more positive way. But I also think, just being honest, like, this law is failing. These policies are failing. We need more money in education, and you just got to make it personal. I mean, that would be, and I think that is not just something just with education and funding. I think it's across the board with all sorts of issues that come up and we're facing right now. So.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. That's a good question.
So, like in the chemistry department, does the writing change between, like, say, biochem and kinetics, or do you guys kind of keep the same format through all?
It's an excellent question. So overall, in general, the writing is very similar. It doesn't matter in which field you are. I think the writing will change a little bit depending on the journal that you're trying to submit your paper in. No matter what, most of the journals are followed by ACS or American Chemical Society referencing, or just like writing style. So usually you would see a very common thread throughout. The language is very similar, but you will see some small little details here and there, depending on the field, absolutely.
I have a question. Oksana, I think some of the other presenters, Professor Lau, I apologize, some of the other professors have talked about writing for different audiences, right? And I wonder, is there any chemistry writing that is done for audiences other than academic audiences? And what does that look like, and how does that change the way you write?
Absolutely, and I think it's a great question. I think a lot of complaints are from the communities out there that, you know, you have to take this scientific paper with all this terminology and kind of dumb it down, right, to the level, which is not truly, I don't believe in that. It's not truly dumbing it down. I think it's actually talent when you can take something very complicated and put it in a conversational piece that everyone can have, you know, that conversation about. So there are people who do it, yes, you know, especially like, you know, if something goes on the television or you are working on a project that is truly groundbreaking, you definitely want to make sure that you communicate not just to the scientific community, but also to the community as a whole. So yes, there's definitely a difference there, absolutely. It's not, I will be honest with you, I don't know if the scientists truly do it. I think unless they're specifically asked to truly interpret their research or asked on the interview or they give it talks. But I think there are specific organizations that actually kind of in a way translate the papers. And sometimes they do it right, sometimes not so much, right? But it's just, unfortunately, fortunately, that is the case. But yeah, usually scientists most of the time write for a scientific community, to be completely honest.
So throughout your writing careers, what areas do you think have been your most complex when writing articles or information?
Complex for me have been the op-eds, the journal articles, book chapters, and the book that I wrote. You know, you follow the format. Op-eds have a format, but the op-eds were sensitive because I wrote them based on this community and I live in this community. So intersectionality made those op-eds difficult. All three of them were published in the Asheville Citizen Times. I'm a parent of kids in the school, so my kids' teachers and other teachers are going to read it. I'm a teacher educator at UNC Asheville. My students were going to read it, but I still felt like I had to have a voice. People can't put me in boxes, but it was the most difficult because by identity occupies so many different spaces. Someone might have been offended, but oh well. They have to see me as intersectional, but it was difficult, the most difficult of all.
I think for me, it's always been the most challenging is when I've had to write about my writing. So particularly in grad school, that was tough because. And that's why I think that you should all start sooner than later on being able to articulate what you're doing in your work, because it does help. You know, it'll help you become better writers. You'll understand your material more. You'll be able to articulate it. But for me, that was really difficult because though I was, you know, my degree was in literature and creative writing, so I had to, you know, I wrote a whole creative work, and that's sort of where I live, right? And then also writing the critical text, which I wrote all throughout. You know, my career as a student, but that was the most challenging, and figuring out that process to switch, you know, over to the more critical, analytical work in a way that I felt wasn't just talking about my own project, but my project in the larger context of, let's say, literary nonfiction, specifically with trauma narratives. So that was probably the hardest part. And taking the questions about it, that was also really like uncomfortable. But I got used to it, so that was good in the end, I guess.
I think for me was when I was in grad school, one of the tests that we have to do for the PhD program was to come up with the project and write a proposal on a completely different field from your expertise. It was very challenging because you truly have to go into something you have no idea and truly research it, and then we had to defend it. So the defense was also like 4 or 5 hours. We had to defend, and we had to know all the nuances and all the chemistry behind it, But the process was so hard, but so great, because after that it was all done. I think I was just like, I can write any proposal. But but that was the most challenging, because I truly have to go into a field that I had no idea about. But
Well, I want to be cognizant of everybody's time, and I want to thank everyone again for being here. Those of you who are here as students, please make sure to sign in so that your professors know that you were here today. And if you would, please help me put more round of applause for our panelists today.